Good evening on this very wet Wednesday on May the 15th from Winkler, Manitoba. It might be raining where you are too. I don't know, but we're certainly getting our share of precipitation. My name's Karl Krebs, and we are going to get into the Wednesday segment of our podcast, Farm to Market, with my knowledgeable colleague and all-knowing, all-seeing, and now he's going to correct me on that one, 53 years, Harry Siemens. He's going to join me in a minute, and we got some stuff to talk about. So why don't we get started right now? Well, my name is Karl Krebs. I'm the host and the founder of Things That Matter, the real things that matter. And certainly one of those things, as I was thinking about a Wednesday podcast, was what about those prices we're paying in the market? How does that all factor in? What's happening in the producer's world that we may need to know about to deal with ever increasing prices in the market? And there was one guy who came to mind right away, and his name is Harry Siemens of Siemens Says. I'm going to bring him onto the stage right now because after 53 years, Harry, you know a lot about the ag producers. So let's just a brief synopsis, like 30 seconds of yourself and how you got to where you are right now. I know you're a farm kid, so let's start there and just give the update to the listener here.
1971, things weren't that great on the farm. In fact, the prices were bad. I came home from the University of Manitoba. I was going to get married that year. And so my father says, you know what, Harry, there's an advertisement in the Red River Valley Echo, and they're looking for a farm broadcaster at Radio Southern Manitoba. The last thing, no, it wasn't ever even on the radar screen that I would ever do that. I applied. A month later, I was in the studio working with Jim McSweeney, who was the production manager, morning man, and I was, I think, the last guy that he actually physically helped and trained as a broadcaster, and the rest, they say, is history. That was 1971.
Well, that's a lot of years. You know, Harry, when I first met you years ago, I was just intrigued by this career. We don't see that today, that a person would stay in an industry and have a career of that length. But certainly you bring a lot of depth and insight. And I know you attend a lot of events, which is where you get a lot of your information. You're still actively writing and engaged with people. So in the last couple of weeks, we talked about some interesting stuff. We talked about the COOL program, the country of origin labeling, and how that could possibly affect us and what we need to know about it. We talked about wild pigs even. I thought that was an interesting thing that never knew we have wild pigs and how we're going to control that. And in last week's, to bring it up to speed for our listeners, we had a talk about the algae problem in Lake Winnipeg. Is there anything you want to add or update us on in any of those areas?
Well, Manitoba Port, General Manager Cam Dahl, and we focused on the editorial column that he had written at that time, you know, asking that, yes, it was titled, Farmers Want to Be a Partial Solution to the Problem of Algae in Lake Winnipeg. And he was inviting that we form a task force. And so I did a little search initially, and I could see that there was some positive response. I should have gotten a hold of Cam a little bit earlier. I sent him an email. I said, number one, I said, a great editorial, a great way of approaching this particular problem. We want to be part of the solution. And I asked him, have we got any response, you know, from the provincial government, from the various organizations? I believe there was some from the University of Manitoba, and there were some other ones that were saying, yes, we're ready to work with you. But then I looked at it briefly, and there were some caveats, you know, in order to make this thing work. So that's number one. You know, like we need to keep a watch on that one. Secondly, you talk about country of origin labeling. We had in 2015, we had mandatory country of origin labeling Canada, Mexico took that to the World Trade Organization, won it, and it basically really helped the hog industry continue to flow across the border. Now the U.S. government has not only proposed, but they've said the rules in effect January 1st, 2026. And I was on a webcast a couple of weeks ago, and that thing isn't going away. And again, Cam Dahl being the spokesman for Manitoba Pork, he says, Harry, I'm really, really concerned about what that voluntary country of origin labeling will do. The U.S. government, the biggest meat purchaser in the United States, has said, you know what, if you want the product name labeled made in the USA on it, you got to make sure that that calf, that pig, that chicken, that they are born, raised, and processed in the United States.
Right, and that's the real potential, because as you said in previous, there are in the hog industry, there are many. How many million weanlings go across the border every year?
You know, we could be talking about wild pigs, and we could talk about squeal on pigs, but not on this one. Here we got 3 million from Manitoba producers going across into the Midwest of the United States.
Yeah, that's an awful lot of pigs going south.
Yeah, and you know what? If this voluntary country of origin labeling, I mean, it is in effect. The rules are there. If it stays in effect, and they're still having some time, you know, some time to negotiate and see if they can't ease some of that. But it doesn't look like the U.S. government is going to back off on this thing. So we will have that. And what does that mean? I mean, processors in the United States, they can still take pigs that have come from Canada, but they can't put the product label on it, that it's made in the USA, and the U.S. government doesn't buy it. So what do you think the processor will do? So it's voluntary on one hand, but on the other hand, it's maybe even more compulsory than anything else. So Cam Dahl again told me, you know, we've got the World Trade Organization ruling from 2015. That one, they're going to pursue that and see if they can't make that thing work for this one too.
So we'll keep you updated, folks, as that goes, as things develop there. But today, what's happening in the ag industry right now? What's of prime concern to the producer? Let's get it straight from you, because I know you're monitoring. What's the concern of the producer today in breaking news, that call it?
I'm looking at a release from the Wheat Growers Association of Western Canada. And the Wheat Growers Association continues to urge the federal government to take immediate action to prevent a shutdown of the Canadian rail system caused by a union-led strike.
So we're talking both railways here, both of our national railroads.
Work stoppage by both railways would cause long-term damage to Canadian agriculture and jeopardize the viability of Canada's economy. And let me tell you, that's coming from the Wheat Growers, one of the top organizations, in my opinion, in Western Canada.
Yeah. So as a producer is preparing and getting into the seeding, of course, that's already happened in some areas, but with the rain, there might have been a slowdown or a stoppage for now. His thoughts are on the fall market, but we're not that way as we were one time. In my understanding, the fall was that busy time where the railroads were really moving product, but it's a year-round affair now. You take a look at all the stockpiles of grain and such, and the producer is now free to move his product, right? He can do any contracts as he wishes. But so this is a year-round thing. I mean, if this stops now, it has a ripple effect right away.
Farmers rely heavily on the movement of grain, fertilizer, and other inputs by rail. So if they both stop working, it severely disrupts the supply chain. Here's the other thing that I told you just before we came on air, is that we've got customers. You know, if you take the West Coast, I've toured the Port of Vancouver, and China takes, you know, so much of their grain right from there. And so we shut down the railroads. That means our countries who depend on the product to feed their people, you know, we aren't reliable supplier anymore. It's like I told you before. If you're going to tell your company where you're trucking to and saying, you know, I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be around tomorrow, whether I can do this next week. Well, pretty soon they're looking for somebody else. And so that's the biggest challenge right now, that we don't ruin our reputation on the world market by all of a sudden not being able to supply their needs.
You know, just off the top, and I'm putting you on a spot on this, but it just came to mind: trucking versus railroad in terms of the volume of product that farmers need. Any idea on the percentage of that? Because I cannot see a trucking industry keeping pace with what railroad cars can move. There's just no comparison there.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, you take the big elevators, you go along Highway 75, we call them input terminals. You can get 110 car train. And the way the system is now set up with the Port of Vancouver, those trains never have to stop. They can come into the one at St. Agatha and they can slowly fill those 110 cars in the wintertime without stopping at all. You know, and why? Why would you want to turn the diesel off if you don't have to in -40 weather and try and start it up again, you know, 2 days later? So that's the thing. And then they take that to Vancouver and they can unload exactly the same way. They do not have to stop. So comparing trucks, you know, would be specific and smaller specific markets, you know, something that's just
kind of a niche market is served by the trucking industry.
Absolutely. And the trucking industry, when I was at the Port of Vancouver, they told me exactly, the port manager just said, he says, when that truck starts to come through the mountains, they got to turn on their GPS so we know where exactly they are, so that when they come in, they know where to unload. So yeah. So on one hand, we got a truck. On the other hand, we have 110 rail cars full of grain. So the difference, I'm not quite sure. But when we shut down the railroads, we shut down the transportation industry. Sure, trucking can help a little bit at that point, but not the overall, when we're shipping millions and millions of bushels to China, Japan, and what other countries we're shipping to.
When we talk about the wheat industry, the producers that are in the grains, it's a very different market than it was, you know, just a little over 10 years ago, when the monopoly, as it was called, really was dismantled. So today we have the farmer dealing directly in the market. How does that point to some of the differences? Maybe just go back a little bit, back to 2012, and then bring us forward to today's market with these challenges that producers are facing.
For 45 years, we had the Canadian Wheat Board, and it was a really good tool when it first started. You know, it was there to work on behalf of farmers. But as it developed and developed, the monopoly became bigger and bigger and bigger, and they weren't always having the best interests of farmers at heart. They had the monopoly at heart. And that's the one that started to bug me already in 1980, when I started to take a stand saying, you know what, we need to give farmers the freedom to market. So the monopoly, you know, I farmed from 65 to 71, 72. And in 68, 69, the wheat board depended totally on quota. So I had a 3-bushel quota. And that meant that out of 100 acres, I could deliver 300 bushels. That's it. At $1.30 a bushel, I couldn't make it on that, because there just wasn't, they weren't selling the grain. There was a glut. And so farmers were caught in this monopoly. But the other thing people are still wondering, is it better without? It's absolutely better. Why? Because in Manitoba, we only marketed about 10% of our wheat and barley through the Canadian Wheat Board. They didn't take the feed grains, they took the bread wheats and the barley, right? But at the same time, it had such a huge umbrella effect over the entire industry, because so many things that had to do with wheat and barley, the Canadian Wheat Board monopoly would simply say, well, you can't do that. You can't do that. That's illegal. That's illegal. So it really put a damper on how farmers could actually market their grain. And, and I could talk about it for a long time, but things changed, and under Jerry Rich, who was the Minister of Agriculture and the Wheat Board, Stephen Harper was the Prime Minister, and they introduced the Freedom of Marketing Bill. And as of August the 1st, which is the beginning of the next crop year, 2012, great celebration for the simple reason from now on, farmers didn't have to market under the monopoly. They could go, it didn't matter to them whether they hauled 75 miles or 100 miles or 10 miles. The basis made the difference and paid for the freight in between. So, but the farmer was dealing directly with the elevator manager, or his own consultant was doing the same. Whereas before, you were just, you know what? You hauled to the elevator, you had wheat, and then you had to deal with them and wait for your check.
Right. So the producer has a lot more responsibility in the market today, and a lot more control over it too. Because we talk about the producer who's a price taker, but he also has the ability to book his contracts according to what's happening on the open market, right?
Oh yes. I mean, right now, I could talk about a number of marketers and marketing newsletters. One is the Wild Oats newsletter, published for I don't know how many years by a fella, very good friend, John Dubinow. And I just had a chance to visit with him just 2 weeks ago. And he's the kind of person, he puts out this weekly newsletter, and he always says, this is, and he farms at Sperling, but he says, this is how we market. This is how much we have sold of our current crop year. Whereas before, you had to wait for the wheat board to do some of that. And then you wondered whether they would ever get to the point of getting, and you never knew what the price was until the final price would come out. So yeah. Absolutely. From what I gather, and I'm no expert on marketing, but I read and watch and listen to guys like John Dubinow and Jonathan Driedger of Left Wing Marketing. And these guys, they are out there working on behalf of the farmer. They know what's going on in the marketplace. So the farmer pays them a bit of a premium. And so they don't tell you when to sell or buy. Mm-hmm. They just make sure you know what the situation is, and then you make up your own mind.
So for you folks listening out there, I'm talking to Harry Siemens, a 53-year veteran in the ag industry. And he always says, this is what he says. It's what he knows. It's what he has observed. And the banner at the bottom is how you can get a hold of Harry at Harry Siemens, #1 @gmail.com, or on X, formerly Twitter, at H Siemens. You can find him there. You can follow him, and you can contact with him as well if you have any questions about what we're talking about here today. What else is happening out there today, and that you want to bring to the attention of people like myself who are just curious about all the things that are happening that affect our food prices? What's going on further to this?
We are in spring seeding time, and a lot of farmers, and that's why they have their consultants. Farmers, they put their mind to farming. They put their mind to putting in the crops. They put their minds into making sure they use, they spray, they seed, they till, whatever it may be. And so they leave some of that other stuff up to their consultants. So what's going on right now? Well, as we said, it was the rail strike is probably on the minds of a lot of people at this point. But at the same time, the grain prices have kind of, almost 3 years, grain farmers had, ever since the conflict in Russia, Ukraine, the grain prices went up. They went up, and about 2 years, almost 3 years, they had record grain prices. The grain prices are still good. But at the same time, when we see the grain prices going up, all the supply products also go up. They don't come down like the grain prices. The grain prices can be, so the input costs and so forth. But you know what? One other thing comes to mind. And I have to be careful that I don't talk just grain, because we talk hogs, we talk cattle. You know, I talk
We
sheep.
need to start a little bit more on the chickens. We've ignored the chickens.
You know, and you're right. And I really, in future programs, I think you know, I would like to touch on supply management, supply marketing, which includes chickens, turkey, and dairy, right? And,
Yes.
and eggs, of course, eggs, and you know, and so that's a totally different ball game. And so, but at the same time, they all require feed. They all require grain,
Yep.
and when the grain price, you know, is when the production fluctuates, the grain price fluctuates, and in those cases, you'll see, you know, prices that affect the consumer prices. I haven't watched as closely, you know, the food professor who's on Twitter regularly, and he's been keeping on tabs on what is going on in the food prices that have nothing to do with supply or anything like that. It has to do with monopoly.
Yep.
That the big three grocery store companies have. And
Yeah, and I think that's where it really gets relative to the consumer who walks in and says, "What the heck happened to lettuce this week? Why am I paying so much?" I know in the midst of all that was COVID and whatever side you're on, it doesn't matter. The reality was you were paying exorbitant prices for a head of lettuce. I remember some guy was somewhere in northern Ontario telling me about paying $12 or $15. I was blown away. I thought, you must have got that wrong. But he said, no, I just was there. So those are things that are happening. And we're trying to connect the lines and connect the dots here so the consumer can say, wow, there's a lot going on. Yes, there is a part that the grocery stores are in on it. And we'll talk about that. I'm not afraid to go there because it's a fact. That with that kind of monopoly, they control the prices in the market, what they'll pay for it.
Yeah, totally. And you know, and that's the, you know, I can't even imagine somebody was saying, you know, what if you only have $50 a week to buy groceries? What are you going to buy? Are you going to still be able to, are you still going to be able to eat healthy? No, you can't. You know, and you know, and so those kinds of things. And
I saw $200 the other day and there was no meat in it. And I talked to a buddy of mine, same thing in Alberta. You talk to anybody, they look at what's in their cart and the exorbitant price it is. And you say, that's incredible. Where is the limit on that? It's like, where's the limit on housing? Where's that going? It's totally unaffordable. Are our groceries going to be unaffordable? And you know what happens, Harry, I'm absolutely certain of this. I can't give you the data, but people start to compromise on the quality of the food just to fill bellies.
Oh,
and that's dangerous.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I had a chance to visit with a manufacturer from Germany a couple of years ago, and he was saying how many, you know, like 2 billion, maybe 3 billion people that really all they ate was bread, you know, every day. And he did the comparison of the calorie intake between European people and African people, and it was huge. You know, like protein was so much higher in this side, and when you're just eating bread, but at the same time, that's all that they could afford at that particular time. So you know what, Karl, I feel really sorry. You and I, we hurt when we see some of those grocery prices, and it's not, you know, but then there's those people that are totally on a fixed income, and you know, what do? They have a family of 3 or 4. My daughter and her husband, you know, they have 6 children, you know, and they're all growing. They're all growing children, you know.
Yeah, and if they've got boys, they got boys with hollow legs. I remember I was a boy with hollow legs.
You know, and they try to always make sure that there's, you know, the proper protein and the proper food on the table, healthy food. But at the same time, so many families, if you're living, you know, even on welfare in the city of Winnipeg or wherever it may be, Winkler, Morton, doesn't matter, and you only have a few dollars, and then you know what? And then if you're smoking yet or something like that, you know, and then all of a sudden there's very little money left to buy good food. And so that's why I hope, in our shows that we can continue to work on, and I'm going to work closely with my friend, the professor, and he's got a real eye on what's going on with food prices across the country, and he's not afraid to tell us what the situation is.
Well, that's it, because we now I'm going back to what Cam Dahl's letter was all about. There's a lot of finger pointing in all of this. When we look at the prices that we're paying off the shelf, out of the produce section, or in the meat cooler, who knows where to put the blame? The prices are just exorbitant. Who's picking up on that? Because we're in an industry, we're in a time where there's too much month left at the end of the money. People are trying to, derive whatever income, but there's a limit to what that can happen. The jobs aren't going to be necessarily keeping pace. I haven't even actually kept track of the COLA, the cost of living allowance, in terms of that. I don't know if we even talk about that anymore, but it seems to be getting out of reach. And so when we get to finger pointing, as Cam was talking about in terms of the algae problem in Winnipeg, how do we look at the prices in the market, and who's to blame for those rising prices? And that's what we're trying to do here, is give a little bit of context to the conversation.
Those people, and I don't want to keep harping on that, but there's animal activists, there's other people that want to blame things on the productive agriculture. As one person told me a couple of years ago, Harry, be absolutely, keep your eyes open. He says there are organizations, there are big money people that somehow want to get the farmer into a situation where they don't have the whole productive agriculture going on. They want them to raise pigs in the backyard. They want them to do this. And so if all of that pressure is on agriculture and producers, exactly that we're going to cut back on production. We cut back on production, the prices go even higher.
Supply and demand, simple, basic economics.
A good part of that, but at the same time, there's also some other things are at play as well.
Yeah. Well, it's not something we're going to exhaust. That's why I feel we have a show that will continue for a while. But again, I think the context is everything. If we don't have the conversation in context, we're going off on a wild goose chase to find out what the truth is. Now, that may not change the price, but it helps you understand that who is driving this? Why are these prices continuing to go up, as wages are not keeping pace with that? People are not earning the kind of money that deals with your three essentials: your food, your shelter, and your clothing. How is it possible then that a young family is going to be able to survive in that market? It's perilous for that family.
And not only that, in agriculture right now, all the way, especially in the processing and in between, we are probably about 40% short of employees. We need people to work, and that's why they keep trying to open the borders to get those people in to work in the processing industry of food. And yet, I know there are processing plants that are not going at maximum. Why? They don't have enough people. And then you see a company like I forget now, the Red Lobster, running down 50 plus stores, in the United States. Why? To try and stave off bankruptcy. Why? Because they can't afford to sell the food in the restaurants, and in a lot of cases, people can't afford to buy them. So boom, they shut down.
Well, you know what, Harry? I know we're all living at different mile markers in life, and I'm still in my good income earning years, and I look at when I go out, just a couple, just a friend, it's no problem to get to a $90 bill and you haven't had a full course meal. You look at that. So again, the food prices manifest themselves in the restaurant prices you pay too.
You know what? And we've seen that since COVID. You've really seen that in the last year, 2 years, where the prices have really gone up, and they go up from the last time to the next time. And I remember when I went through a fast food and I picked up a couple of chicken fingers, and
Yeah.
they were like $4 or $5 the last time. All of a sudden, $8. They doubled from the last time. And I'm not going to say who it was, but they were good, luckily. But at the same time, boom, double in price. And why? Because the cost to the, in this case, we'll talk about that sometime in the future, about the whole aspect.
Yeah, we got to get into that for sure, because we're right at the bottom of the hour here, and I just want to say it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm looking forward that we're going to be able to, hopefully get some facts out there. That's what we want to do, is be purveyors of what we know to be true, versus leaving it up to the imagination of the listener and the consumer out there to draw all the wrong conclusions. But I know you're a big supporter of the ag industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And here my hat goes off, my shout out to all the producers, all the suppliers that are out there making sure they get their crop in, so that, yes, there will be food in the fall, so that we can continue to fill our tummies, fill our hollow legs, as you said them. And I absolutely love being a farmer's advocate, and I will continue to do so until God decides I don't need to anymore. That's Siemens Says. Somewhere, sometime, somehow, I will see you again. Good evening.
Right. Thank you so much. Well, that is Harry Siemens, 53-year veteran in the ag industry, and we are going to talk about all facets of the ag industry to try to connect the dots as we go forward with this Farm to Market podcast that is every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Manitoba time, 5 on the Pacific Coast, and 8 Eastern time. I invite you to share this out. I never thought I'd be this interested in the ag industry as I am, but I'm a consumer. You're a consumer. And when you start to see how little your money goes, how little you can purchase, that the purchasing power of your money is not giving you a cart full. I was a kid, and my mother would buy 2 grocery carts full of food. We ate well as kids, and Riediger's Supermarket was her favorite place. And we'd come out of there with 2 grocery carts full for $150 back in the 70s. You couldn't come close to that today. So please hang out with us here Wednesday, 7 o'clock, and Harry and I will continue to bring you some interesting facts about what's happening in the industry. Because you know what? Your food, the price you pay, yeah, those are things that matter. We'll see you here again next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Good night.